For surfers at any stage, being able to enter the wave and take off with efficiency is crucial to get ourselves on the waves we want and position ourselves correctly. The nuances to the takeoff do pose a challenge to all surfers at some stage, however, with the forever changing lineup and waves, which makes repetition difficult. Unfortunately though, getting more waves isn't as simple as paddling more or harder, and when we can't paddle efficiently, it does place a big ceiling on our surfing because we don't have the necessary ingredients to push our surfing to the next level, this being bigger, faster and harder waves, the exact conditions we most often struggle with. Despite the ever-changing conditions, there are tactics and strategies that I found useful to put in place for my own surfing, which has helped me to get to where I am today, that I would like to share with you all. I think what will be most useful for today is if we break down the very fundamentals of paddling in the beginner section of this video, which will be important for those starting out, but also great for everyone to make sure they're not missing any of the fundamentals. And we'll then step into the advanced component of the edit to cover our advanced approaches and what we need to be doing. So let's get into it. So to start, I just wanted to explain some of the differences between the two different components for the video today, these being the beginner and the advanced techniques. The beginner techniques are more what we're doing to paddle most efficiently, and the advanced stages are more about how we adapt this paddling to what the wave is doing and the techniques we can use to paddle in most efficiently. But let's get stuck into the beginner phase, that being how we can paddle into waves efficiently. So the first thing to consider, and something that we should definitely not overlook, is our position on the board. If we don't have the correct position on the board to start with, then it's going to make getting into the waves near impossible, even with the upcoming techniques. A great way to conceptualize how the board should be positioned is to lay the board on the water and see how it's sitting without you on it. Depending on the rocker, there'll be more or less space between the water and the nose and the tail of the board, but it will obviously look reasonably flat on the water. This is what we need to try and replicate when we're lying on the board. You can see one of the biggest mistakes here, where the surfer is too far back on the tail. This will place a lot of pressure on the tail and create drag, meaning it's nearly impossible to catch the speed and momentum of the wave. And here you can see an example of where the surfer is too far forward, where the nose is underwater, and this will lead to nose diving as we try and catch most waves. So try to correct this position so that the board is as flat as possible. This will usually mean that our chest is a little bit further forward from the midpoint, but this can vary person to person, board to board. The second thing that I wanted to touch on briefly is just our body position as well. As we're paddling for the wave, we want to have the standard position being the chest up and legs together. Our chest orientation can vary as we go into the advanced techniques, but starting in this way builds a good foundation and habits, and the feet together stops the legs from creating drag by dangling in the water. A really important thing that we must understand when we're paddling for waves, of course, is our actual paddling technique. Now, there's a lot that goes into making sure our form is correct for our paddling, so I might do another video on that. But one of the key things is ensuring we're using long, deep strokes. Fewer, longer strokes are much better than many fast, shallow strokes. And we also want to avoid the butterfly in most scenarios, which is often used as a last-ditch effort to catch the wave, but unfortunately, it breaks our flow through the water when we're paddling into the wave. And there's another important cue that I like to use for people starting out, and it's to actually paddle 3 more times than you think you need to. So do another 3 paddles. This is really important so that we don't miss the wave and pop up too early, which is a really common thing in the beginner phases of our surfing. It doesn't necessarily translate directly through to our advanced techniques, so there will be some adjustments that we need to make. But if you're starting out, definitely use this cue and give it 3 more paddles to get into the wave. The last thing that I'd like to cover in the beginner stages, and this could potentially have gone in the advanced stages, but I thought I'd put it here, but it's actually teaching us how to adjust our paddle so that we can paddle into waves faster. A lot of the time, we have our focus on the arms being the only thing that's important when we're paddling, but our body movement is something I find really useful as well. Ensure that it's not just the arms moving, but also moving the body by leaning slightly to the side of the arm that's paddling, as we can increase our reach and depth of the paddle, which will increase our speed. And it's also important to understand that the pressure on the chest here will make the board go faster as well, especially on a longboard. This is why you'll see the chest go down more as we're struggling to get into waves. So for the advanced techniques, what we're going to be doing is covering some of the strategies and adjustments that we can make to our paddling to make sure we're getting into not only the easy waves, but getting into any wave that we want. As with anything, practice makes perfect, but let's cover some things that you can go on to practice in your next few sessions. The first thing here will be understanding our paddle in. One of the biggest mistakes that's easy to make is to paddle for the wave with intent, but then as the wave starts to lift us, we become worried about a potential nosedive, so we allow ourselves to rise up the wave face, having stopped paddling and with our chest arching back, then to recommence paddling when we're at the top of the wave, when it's most often too late. Unfortunately here, we're actually stopping at the key moment where we need to be emphasizing our paddle. Remember, as the wave comes and lifts us, this is the time where we've really got to double down and go in for those few hard extra paddles, and this is actually where most of us stop. Instead, they'll wait at the top of the wave where they recommence paddling and rely on the top of the wave to push them forwards, which won't work. This may come back to the way that we learn to catch waves in the whitewater, where the wave will literally run into us and push us forwards as we paddle, but we can't wait for the same thing on unbroken waves. In most cases, the top of the wave there won't actually give us that same push forwards, and so we'll come off the back. And in some scenarios, depending on the wave as well, we're actually putting ourselves at increased risk of being thrown over the falls. We want to emphasize our paddle as soon as our board angle begins to change, aka beginning lifting, which will be when the wave starts to pick us up. Most of the time, this will mean we have 3 or so really important paddles to make the most of whilst we're in the lifting part of the wave. We can then accelerate with the wave and keep the board flat on the water. In order to emphasize our paddle, we can press our chest into the board, and this at times can even mean lifting our hips up a bit, as this will naturally occur if we press our chest into the board. This will help to shift more weight up the board to carry the momentum and match the wave angle as the wave starts to lift us. Now, this actually introduces a really important concept that we should understand, where we're trying to actually match the angle of the wave with our board. Now, with the prior strategy of the start, stop, start, or the paddle, break, paddle, what we're actually doing is as we're stopping, we're actually bringing more weight onto the back of the board. This will create more drag and actually lift the nose out of the water, so we're not matching the angle of the wave. What we do want to do is use the curve of the wave to our advantage and actually match or mirror that curve with our board, and we can do this with how we're adjusting our weight on the board, and most importantly, making sure we don't have that stopping whilst we're paddling for the wave. If we can commit our paddle in from the bottom of the wave, as we lift up, we're going to get as much of the wave's energy pushing us forwards from the get-go. And this is key to catching 90% of your waves. Well, I know what most of you guys are probably thinking, and that's, well, all of this is well and good, but none of this stops me from nosediving. And you're exactly right. So that brings us to the next point, which is almost as equally as important, when to stop our paddle as well as the cobra position. The cobra position is probably one of the most functional and overlooked parts of the paddle in and takeoff. And in my opinion, it's the key that moves us away from the fear of nosediving to utilizing the wave's acceleration perfectly. It does this by easily allow us to fine tune our weight either forwards or backwards on the board, by either placing weight forwards onto the hands or backwards over the hips and over the tail. This allows us to match the board angle of the wave. If we notice the nose is coming too far out of the water and we're starting to lose momentum, we can place more weight onto the hands, but if we feel like we're about to nosedive, we can bring more weight back over the hips. So when do we actually adopt the cobra position? Well, we really don't want to do this too early, because if we come into this position before we've caught the wave, then obviously we'll fall off the back. So we do need to catch the wave first, which will, in a steeper wave, require less paddling, or if it's a slopier, fatter wave, we'll need to put a fair bit more energy into actually catching it. Once you feel a change in the board's momentum from slow and being drawn up the wave to having some natural speed, we can assume this position. One of the most useful cues for people has been understanding one of the key signs that this shift in momentum is occurring, this being the water flickering over the nose of the board. Water flickering over the nose can very easily be interpreted as the wave getting steep and that you're about to nosedive. But we can also recognise that if this is occurring, then the board is likely relatively flat on the surface of the wave, matching the changing angle of the wave, and that this is a great sign to either pop up or assume the cobra position. So remember, we can use this as a sign not to scare us off for our takeoff, but to tell us that it's time to go. Now, the next part of this is learning how to adjust our paddle or set up our paddle differently depending on how the wave is actually looking. And this is really to avoid one of the big errors that we see, which is paddling too hard too soon. Most of us will experience this in the early stages, where we see a wave we want to catch, and in our excitement, we paddle hard, go all out, only to find that the wave is too steep by the time it reaches us, or worse yet, it breaks straight on us. So this is another example of something that we learn in our early stages of our surfing. So to try and catch the wave, we need to paddle as hard as we can, don't stop, go 3 extra paddles. But unfortunately, this won't actually translate very well, as you'll find, into the more advanced waves, the more advanced takeoffs. We will need to try something different. So the new cue I'd like you to go for is not 3 more paddles, but complete 3 lookbacks every time you're trying to paddle for an unbroken wave. By looking back to the wave a minimum of 3 times before the wave gets to you, you're going to know how the wave is shaping up as it approaches you, and you're going to recognize if the wave is going to be too steep or break on you, where with our other method, we'd be paddling and find out when it's too late. The real hope here as well is that we can learn to adjust our paddle speed as we're paddling for the wave. Depending on how steep the wave is, we'll need to either paddle sooner or later, faster or softer. So let's go through both scenarios and the things we can do and look for. For softer or less steep waves, the waves won't break as early, and so we definitely won't break on us. So there's a couple of things that we'll need to do. Firstly, we'll need to start paddling earlier to get a head start in the race. And secondly, we'll need to paddle even harder. So that may mean using our long, deep strokes and placing our chest into the board to drive and build momentum. An advanced technique is also shuffling yourself further up the board as you're paddling for the wave, or starting with your chest position further towards the nose. You'll see advanced longboarders do this intuitively to ensure their weight is forward of the peak of the wave and to give them the most likely chance of success. This is something to play around with, so for those waves which seem like a lost cause, try shuffling yourself up whilst paddling and see how you go. But please, please, please don't do this for steeper waves. For steeper waves, if we paddle too hard too soon, as we previously covered, we're going to run into some pretty obvious problems. We ideally want to ensure that the wave isn't literally breaking when we're catching it. One thing we can do in this instance is paddle to meet the wave, or in other words, paddle further out the back so that you're not sitting where it's going to be breaking, but position yourself further out in the lineup to catch it before it breaks. We can also choose to let the waves come to us when suitable, and for this we probably won't need lots and lots of paddles. What will be required for the most part is 2 to 3 good paddles in the crucial lifting period of the wave, after which we can feel the shift in momentum, which in steeper waves will occur much faster, and we can then come into our cobra position and resume from here. So I hope that's been really useful for everyone. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you're able to get a little bit out of this one to help you to progress not only with your maybe the beginners getting and paddling into their waves, but learning to catch more advanced waves, which will hopefully get you onto some better waves so you can improve your surfing. If you have any questions with regards to today's video, then please feel free to leave those down in the comments below, as well as, of course, if you want to see anything else on the channel with regards to tutorials or anything like that, anything that you're looking to work on and improve on, then please feel free to leave that down below as well. But we'll leave that there for today, and we'll catch you on the next one.